Joshua chapters 12 to 19 today, and this opens with a list of 31 kings who have been defeated by the Israelites up to this point, I believe. I presume, therefore, also it's 31 kings who finish their days put on a spike, because Joshua is, well, he's quite odd, isn't he, with his thing about obsession about putting kings on spikes until the sun goes down. Chapter 13 then jumps to Joshua becoming very old. To be fair, he may have been quite old before, but it's not said how old he was. And it's just chapter 13 talks about God saying, pointing out to Joshua that he's very old. Doesn't seem to matter. But then going on to say that there's a lot of the land of Canaan still to conquer. It's a little odd, because it seemed like they did an awful lot very quickly. And then suddenly Joshua's old. Presumably he wasn't before, and this is a new thing. So I'm not sure what happened in the middle, but I don't think it really matters either way. I'm going to go with that assumption that it doesn't matter anyway, I think. There's talk about some people who were not driven out from the land of Gishar and Makkah, something like that. So it's interesting, all the total language about everyone's killed and destroyed and driven out and all the rest of it. Clearly there are all these exceptions starting to creep in, and several of them. So again, that ties into that idea of the total language, talking about things happening on a massive scale and in an absolute fashion that clearly weren't. It's just embellishment that seems to be rife at this time. Most of this section, and this is the reason we're doing 12 to 19, it's quite a big chunk, is very boring. It's just about how the land is divided between the different tribes of the Israelites. And there's a lot of geographical detail in there. It's just really odd. I mean, I'm sure that's really useful for the biblical scholars. Not so interesting for us looking for the big picture. So I'm largely just going to skip over it and just pull out the bits that are vaguely interesting towards the big picture. The thought occurs on all that detail that, yeah, sure, if we accept that all this stuff is true, then that becomes quite interesting. And you can really sort of figure out what's happening where and potentially when, to some extent, maybe. But I'm far from convinced that this stuff is literally true anyway, not just made up as part of or it's embellished to a significant extent in order just to illustrate something. So perhaps we might need to come back later and fill this in if later this emerges to be about right. But for now, at least, I'm not going to worry about that deep detail in terms of the geography, and we'll just leave that to the scholars. There's a reminder that the Levites aren't going to receive an inheritance in terms of part of the land of Canaan. And there's this wonderful phrase about the reason why, being that priestly service of the Lord is their inheritance. You're thinking, great. I did wonder if that's part of looking at it through a modern lens. And these days, if you could be given a ton of land, or you could be made into a vicar, which would be better? I think most people would probably go for the ton of land, rightly or wrongly. I'm not knocking anything. But this is suggesting, at least, that the role of being the priestly tribe is a really big deal and a better inheritance than the land. Whether the Levites would agree with this or not, I don't know. And of course, there's also relevant that we had Nadab and Abihu, way back in episode 23 now, who were trying to do their priestly duty and got set fire in front of their dad. So, it's not like it's an easy gig being one of the priests or anything. You get stuff wrong, you can get set fire to. So it's, it does feel like that has the potential to be a bit of a bum deal for them. Oh, I suppose actually people do bring them food. I have to admit, if someone brought me food, I think I would like that. Would I rather have food than land? I suppose there's something to be said for, you're not going to be wealthy by being brought food instead of owning land. But I guess part of the purpose for having land is to produce stuff so you can be brought food or make food. Perhaps not all as bad as it sounds. It's difficult with these contexts where we're removed by 3,000 years. There's a bit where a chap called Caleb, who we did briefly encounter before. I don't think I edited him out. He was one of the spies that went into the Promised Land years and years ago, sent by Moses. Turns out that was 45 years ago, at the point where Caleb was 40. So he's now 85, and he's coming to Joshua saying, at the time I did this thing, I was promised a great inheritance. Can I have it now? And to be fair, he's waited 45 years, so it would seem reasonable. So Joshua gives him the land of Hebron, I believe it is, the city of Hebron. And Caleb then goes and has to drive out some Anakites there, but then it says that all is fine. And there's mention of the land then had a rest from war. It's interesting, the word rest, isn't it? It feels like pause, not end of. So presumably there's more to come. But yeah, so just in case that's relevant, Caleb has been given his inheritance 45 years after he earned it. Actually, think about it, there was one other bit on that, in that Caleb, who makes the big case that I'm still young and virile and I can fight and all the rest of it, at 85, says to his army commanders that whoever takes a particular city, he will give his daughter in marriage to. He just casually give away his daughter to someone who's willing to sack and destroy a city. It's a different time, isn't it? And people are very casual with their daughters. There's another mention about some Canaanites who were spared. There's Canaanites who are living in the land of Gezer, G-E-Z-E-R, don't know. They're not driven out of the land, although it does sound different to the last lot of people who were mentioning it. They weren't driven out of the land, it just left it that they lived among the Israelites. This lot, they were allowed to live among the Israelites, but they were put to forced labour, so not really a great deal better. But again, another example, not everyone was destroyed, not everyone was driven out, despite the fact it said that. There's a few more references to that sort of thing happening as well, so that's definitely not just a random one-off. There's clearly a few pockets where Canaanites were not driven out and were not killed. And say forced labour, yeah, great, but it does seem a little odd, doesn't it? Surely it's easier to drive out a population than to subject them to forced labour, because then you've got to control them and monitor them, and surely it's easier to chuck them out. Maybe that's just naive thinking on a countrywide basis, but an interesting one. There's a bit of a grumble from the descendants of Joseph, who seem to think that their land allocation's a little small or something, and Joshua points out that no, you've got this bit up here. They say, but that's full of people who've got chariots fitted with iron. And Joshua's response is basically just stop worrying, just go and drive them out, you'll be fine. It's a bit odd. It's not clear if that is then fine or anything else. It's interesting just to note there was a bit of a grumble. We didn't get as much as we wanted, and I don't know if these chariots are fitted with iron. That sounds like a fairly advanced civilization there that's going to need scrapping with. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Joshua also gets his own town, which sounds a bit sort of like, yeah, I bet, yeah. But it is noted that it's given by the Israelites, as it doesn't sound like he's just nicked it himself. It was commanded by God, and it wasn't like he just cherry-picked his favourite or anything. It sounds like it was assigned by lots in the presence of the Lord, it says. So, yeah, I mean, he's still got a pretty crap job, hasn't he? And to be fair, he's been the leader, so that doesn't sound particularly unreasonable, but we'll see. He gets his own town anyway, so that's pretty cool, isn't it? But yes, that's a big old section there that's largely not very interesting, but a few interesting bits to note in that. We've got another little bit, and then that'll be the end of the book of Joshua, actually. Quite short after all the fighting, and seems to cover quite a broad period of time. But yeah, so we'll on to the next one and see what happens next.